I'm delighted to be here with you today. As it was mentioned, I grew up on a farm in Iowa, about 3 hours northeast of here, outside of a town of Holy Cross. Raised on a kind of traditional Iowa farm, I would say, corn, soybeans, and a small beef cattle operation. Although, interestingly enough, when I went to college, our cattle operation got much smaller. I blame my parents because they no longer had some free labor to help with. I have had the honor to serve in my current role for just over a year. November was a year at USDA. And during my first year, I have been to well over a dozen countries and over a dozen states. You're actually catching me in between 2 international trips right now. I got back from Europe on Sunday, and I leave for Kenya on Saturday. So it's good timing that I was able to make a quick trip to Iowa. This is actually the first time in my current role that I've been asked to speak to a group of Iowans. It's really an honor, but I guess when the Secretary of Agriculture is also from Iowa, it's kind of hard to compete. As was mentioned, in addition to the domestic farm programs administered by the Farm and Foreign Agricultural Services, or FFAS, we also have the Farm Service Agency and Risk Management Agency. I oversee our international activities, which includes foreign trade, export promotion, and food security programs administered by the Foreign Agricultural Service, or FAS. I'll try not to use too many acronyms. As you heard, we love our acronyms in Washington, D.C. And also, just as well, we also really love our long titles, as you can see by mine. A lot of people probably also in Iowa are a lot more familiar with the domestic work that we do, but our the work in the international area is vitally important to farm income in rural communities. We work to expand markets for American goods abroad, to break down barriers to trade, and to assist U.S. businesses with resources needed to reach customers around the world. The Foreign Agricultural Service has employees in 94 countries all over the world. As a result of that work, the United States just wrapped up another successful year in agricultural exports. We ended 2015 fiscal year with overall food and ag exports totaling $139.7 billion, the third highest on record. Those exports help boost farm income, generate rural economic activity, and support more than 1 million jobs here at home. In beef exports, we have seen an amazing increase over the past decade. In 2005, U.S. beef exports totaled $1.2 billion. By 2010, they had climbed to $3.7, and today, just 5 years later, they are sitting at $6.7 billion. Keeping world markets open to U.S. beef exports has been an ongoing effort at USDA. This year, the Foreign Ag Service facilitated expanded beef and live cattle market access in several major markets following the World Organization for Animal Health's 2003 recognition of the United States as a negligible risk country for BSE. As a result, last year, Chile, Peru, and St. Lucia fully opened to U.S. beef in accordance with the OIE recommendations, while Singapore, Vietnam, Lebanon, Panama, and Japan expanded the range of U.S. products that are allowed entry. This expanded exports are expected to add millions of dollars of additional exports in the coming years. The U.S. negligible risk status also allowed USDA to improve market access for U.S. live cattle. Negotiations with Mexico, Peru, Pakistan, and Turkey resulted in new animal health protocols that allowed resumption of U.S. cattle exports, and we continue to coordinate strategies within the government to continue to press other countries to adopt OIE recommendations. Looking ahead, we continue to put more resources towards this effort and additional resources to expand some of the other meats like lamb. Another way that we work to expand international trade and opportunities for U.S. products is through trade agreements. And topping this priority right now is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, or TPP. You know, I joke that my everyday is trade because that's what a big part of my job is, but really right now in Washington, D.C., trade is the topic of the hour. The TPP agreement advances economic interests in a critical region that accounts for nearly 40% of global GDP. It will strengthen trade rules and provide specific new market access commitments for U.S. agricultural exports, especially to some key markets in Japan, which is currently our 4th largest market, Vietnam, Malaysia, New Zealand, and Brunei. It is an exciting time to be concluded this FTA with several of the emerging economies in Asia. Today, the population is measured in hundreds of millions of people, Within 30 years, it's going to be measured in billions, as over 3 billion. They also represent a growing middle class. By 2030, it is expected that 66% of the world's middle class will reside in Asia, representing 59% of the world's middle class consumption. One thing we see over and over again in the world is when when they reach that middle class status, when they make a little bit more disposable income, the first thing they want to do is buy better food, meats, fresh fruits and vegetables, dairy, other sources of protein, things that the US really excels at producing. TPP is necessary for beef exports to really remain competitive in this region, especially as other TPP countries already enjoy preferential treatment under existing trade agreements. I really believe that livestock products, including beef, are a huge winner in this agreement. The inclusion of Japan really changed the TPP dynamics and was especially significant for beef. Japan is already a top export market for beef despite high tariffs that can really reach as high as 50%. In fact, of the 6.7 billion beef we exported last year, more than 21% or 1.4 billion went to Japan alone. The TPP will provide unprecedented access to the Japan's market. Japan will eliminate duties on 3/4 of its beef and beef product imports within 16 years, with substantial cuts to the remaining tariffs. Japan will reduce fresh, chilled, and frozen beef cuts to 9% by year 16. And this is important to note because it's the first time Japan has ever agreed to a beef tariff of single digits. In addition, Vietnam, Brunei, and New Zealand will eliminate beef tariffs, and Malaysia will lock in 0%. Not only does TPP offer new opportunities for the livestock sector, but expanding sales of meat, poultry, and dairy are creating more demand for the feed grains like corn and soybeans, further benefiting TPP benefits to Iowa producers. Of course, until we pass TPP through Congress, we won't be able to enjoy these new opportunities. If TPP is important beyond tariff cuts and new quotas. It will generate more economic growth, which will translate into greater demand for agricultural products that the United States can supply. We found that for every $1 of agricultural exports, we actually stimulate another $1.22 of business activity in our rural communities. I can attest to this. Growing up on a farm, I know firsthand that at the end of the year, if my dad had some extra money, he was investing that in new equipment, upgrading his facilities, better in new technologies. And it's also important when you line that up next to the fact that 20% of farm income comes from agricultural exports. Simply stated, if you removed agricultural exports, you would remove much of the profitability from the farm sector. Better ties with this region will also facilitate doing business, as we have seen in other countries where we have free trade agreements today. Trade agreements not only open markets, it more closely integrates the economics and our national interests with our trading partners. It is an important step to opening markets in the Asia-Pacific region, but it's only the first one. Already, we have numerous countries already, as I like to say, knocking at the TPP door, asking when they can join. And China is also really closely watching what we're doing here and calculating its interests in being part of the economic bloc that hosts some of the most important export markets in the world. Important also to note is China. They are also negotiating a competitor to TPP with 16 other Asian nations, and really trying to balance out the US influence in the region. Bringing home TPP agreement is a necessary step to getting into those markets and in ensuring that we keep a competitive edge in those markets. Finally, TPP is an important leverage point for us when we try to advance other trade agreements like the European Union. It shows that we can close a deal if our interests are there and that no sector, especially agriculture, can be excluded. I'll talk a little bit more in just a minute about our negotiations with the European Union. Similarly, TPP is generating new interest among trading partners who don't want to fall behind their competitors in accessing the US market. Just as we see more Pacific countries lining up to join TPP, we also hear countries from other parts of the world seeking new trade agreements with us. This momentum should help our work in the World Trade Organization, where we have long needed some leverage to get other countries to improve their offers in agricultural negotiations. Just as other countries are worried about being left behind, we run the risk of losing ground ourselves if Congress does not act to approve the TPP agreement. Currently, some of our biggest competitors have already negotiated preferential deals in the TPP region, and I think beef is a great example of this. Australia just closed a deal with Japan earlier this year that allows Australian beef to enter Japan at a 30% tariff compared to the 38.5% tariff that US beef has to compete with. Next year, the tariff on Australian beef will fall further, putting them at a 10 percentage point advantage. If we don't implement TPP, we will immediately level, or when we implement TPP, we'll immediately level that playing field, driving really the benefit for both us and Australia, and driving that tariff down to 9%. A similar dynamic is also in play in other TPP countries, particularly Vietnam and Malaysia, and for a wide range of other products. And it gets worse. Many TPP countries are moving forward with additional trade agreements, including with some of our competitors like the European Union, that threaten to further disadvantage our producers. We can't really measure the world of with TPP or without because the world's continuing to move forward. Standing still in the US is really falling behind in this region. The bottom line is that rules of the road are up for grabs in Asia, the world's fastest growing region. If we don't pass this agreement and write those rules, ask yourself who will set them: Europe, China, and how will the US producers fare under those circumstances? Turning briefly from the Pacific to the Atlantic, while it hasn't really grabbed as many headlines as TPP has, we are negotiating a trade agreement with our European counterparts. It's called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP. There's another fun acronym for you. The pace is really starting to pick up in these negotiations, but the EU has still not really been offering concessions on some key US priorities, export priorities, including many livestock products. For our part, we continue to remind the EU about the fundamental importance of providing commercially viable opportunities for our producers into the EU market. Access to the EU beef market has always been a challenge for US. The US and the EU have strong regulatory protections. If nothing we do through TPP will undermine this. But there are steps that can be taken to better align our regulatory and standard-setting systems by improving transparency, participation, and accountability. After all, the United States and Europe are far more alike than they are different, and when it comes to agriculture and rural issues that we're experiencing. And we both stand to benefit substantially from a TTIP package, which includes strong action for agriculture. We really need to base this on the only common language between us, which is science, in deciding what is safe and what is legal. From there, we should let our producers decide how they want to produce it, and our consumers decide what they want to spend their money on. We should not have this choice made by unnecessary regulatory restrictions. As I mentioned, I was in Europe last week, including a short trip to Brussels. We still have many tough issues to overcome in the negotiations. However, looking to the next year, I expect a sense of urgency to really pick up and increase in the negotiations. But I often remind my European counterparts that just seeing tariffs addressed alone is commercially meaningless to us. We need to see many of the sanitary and phytosanitary and non-tariff barriers addressed as well in this negotiation. However, that being said, TTIP is an opportunity to more closely align trade across the Atlantic and has the potential to be the largest trade agreement ever negotiated in the world. While I'm talking about challenging trading partners and trading relationships, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention China. It certainly ranks up there with challenging trading partners as it does the EU. While China remained the United States' largest ag export market, China's import ban on beef still stands. We do continue to engage China on market access for beef, poultry, and pork products, as these are priority issues that receive regular high-level attention. Most recently, early in November, mid-November, I was in China for the Joint Commission on Commerce and Trade. It's the highest level bilateral trade forum that there is. We discussed beef at length with China and will continue to try to make progress there. Now let me jump from bilateral issues to multilateral issues, specifically the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. While I was in Europe last week, I also made a quick stop in Geneva. I went to help to lay some of the groundwork for the upcoming 10th WTO ministerial that will take place in Nairobi next week. The WTO remains a foundation of our trade policy, both the source of most of our trade rules and the arbiter of trade disputes. In one place, we have 161 members representing the key agricultural producers, exporters, and importers. This is where we want, and I want to emphasize want, to shape global rules that open markets to competition. Unfortunately, in recent years, the WTO members have been unable to really find a way forward to address some of the biggest problems in the agricultural sector: trade, subsidies, and non-tariff measures. What we need to do is to get the WTO reoriented to these core functions. Until then, we are aggressively pursuing other opportunities through bilateral or regional trade agreements like TPP and TTIP. In time, we expect the WTO members to refocus efforts coming up with practical solutions to trade problems. But first, we need to put the Doha round negotiations, which started 14 years ago in 2001, behind us. Expectations for this upcoming Nairobi ministerial are low. Key players have already taken off tariffs and domestic support off the table. So focus is now on measures related to export competition, export subsidies, export credits, international food aid, and state trading enterprises. Our objective for the Nairobi meeting is to finalize a commitment to end export subsidies, which the US did, ended the last of our remaining one in the 2014 Farm Bill. At the same time, we are very cautious about what we might agree to regarding our export credit and food aid programs. We're not willing to see fundamental changes to those programs through this WTO meeting. Just as important is the process post-Nairobi. We want to use this meeting as to stop the endless circular discussion that has characterized the Doha round and start a process of the WTO reorientating itself towards the big issues of agricultural trade. So what are some of those issues? Well, first, now that we have seen so many free trade agreements, not just that the US has been negotiating, but other countries, how do we apply these tariffs in a coherent global fashion? Next, the landscape on domestic support has changed dramatically, with the EU and the US making our programs much less trade distorting in world markets. But we have seen an increase in subsidies from the emerging agricultural producers and many emerging agricultural economies. How can the WTO rules address subsidy policies to prevent damages to other producers? Finally, some of our biggest trade barriers are now non-tariff measures. The WTO has strong principles for using scientific basis for dealing with the health and safety measures. But our exporters are looking for stronger tools to address unjustified barriers. Can we take the improvement that we saw in TPP and use the WTO to take those rules to the next step? I know I've thrown a lot out at you this morning, but if I leave you really with one thought, it would be this: that exports matter to the Iowa beef industry, to our state, and to American agriculture as a whole. Iowa ranks the second in the nation in terms of total food and agricultural exports, and fourth overall in terms of beef exports. And those exports here continue to support more than 70,000 jobs in Iowa. Thank you for your time and attention today. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and happy to take some questions that you might have. So the question is about currency and how countries can fluctuate the currency and the value respective to the dollar. So one of the things that the TPP parties, on a side declaration in conjunction with concluding the TPP negotiations, they worked on a joint declaration on currency manipulation. And so yearly they will get together, and this is, I know just enough to be dangerous, so I won't go into too much detail as the Treasury Department really leads this, but yearly they'll be meeting with all TPP parties on the regulatory matters that people are doing to address currency issues in their countries, really to avoid countries from doing currency manipulation. So we are having a side dialogue with all our TPP parties to ensure that those types of things don't happen. Well, yesterday the WTO arbitrator came out with the number in the case, and it was just around $1 billion, split up about 780, I believe, for $1 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs that they could place from Canada and 220 something from Mexico. The US was obviously disappointed by how large of a number, and really this has some huge potential trade implications in North America as a whole, not just the United States. putting on retaliatory measures doesn't just hurt U.S. businesses and producers, it really hurts importers, businesses in the respective countries in Canada and Mexico, but also consumers of those products. We've been through multiple appeals processes. This has been going on for several years within the WTO, and we've been quite clear we need Congress to act to change the law in order to address some of the concerns that the WTO panel found within our domestic country of origin labeling law. USDA, the U.S. government, really stands ready to help Congress in trying to figure out what that solution might be. And we've been having many conversations with them on what that might be. But country of origin labeling on its face value is about consumer information. The WTO did not find that consumers shouldn't have that information. What they found is you can't implement it in a way that is discriminatory against foreign countries' exports to your country. Well, what they found was that there was a disincentive for businesses, for the retail industry to buy not just U.S. born, raised, and slaughtered U.S. cattle for beef for sale, and that as a result of that disincentive, that there was a price impact on producers in Canada and Mexico. There's obviously a way. We stand ready to work with Congress and our producers on how we can give consumers the right to know certain information that they want to know, while also doing it in a way that lives up to our international trade obligations. In 2014, our ag exports were about 150 billion. It was a record of the record since we've been keeping track. This year, ag exports are down to 139 billion. So the strength of the dollar is, I think, affecting us. But we do continue to work. That's why we put so much effort at USDA into opening new markets and not just having the few open that we always send our products to. Most of the soybeans in the United States go to China. We work to look for new markets for the soybeans outside of China, because when China decides they don't want to buy U.S. soybeans, it dramatically impacts our price here. So we really work to try and find new markets and ensure that the markets we have are following rules based on science and not some other types of barriers that if they're trying to throw them up. Our beef exports have been blocked since 2003, when we had our atypical case of BSE in the United States. Since then, we have had fits and starts of negotiations with China to get back in there. We have been working closely with various packing industries in DC, also the Cattlemen's Association in DC, to try and figure out, they're oftentimes what we've seen, and I think Japan's a good example of when we first get back into a new market, there's restrictions on it, whether it's an age limit, certain cuts limits, and so it's been negotiating some of that back and forth. We have placed a priority on this, as has the cattle industry, because many of our competitors are in there. Australia's back in there. Brazil just signed a protocol to start exporting again. So it's important that the U.S. can get back in there as well. It's a large market. It's a growing beef market. And particularly when you're looking at a population in the billions, well over 1 billion, it's an important market to get a taste, I think, for U.S. beef. And so we're continuing those negotiations. We talked about it with our Chinese counterparts in November. A technical team was there, and then I was there with the secretary and continued to press that issue. I haven't been to the whole world, but I do think there is a growing, we produce a very different type of beef than, say, Australia in the United States, certainly in Iowa. And so there is a lot of times a complement to U.S. beef or Australian beef. And there is definitely, when you go to some of the higher end stores, retail stores, there is certainly an interest in having that U.S. steak, or at some hotels or nicer restaurants. So there is definitely, I think, a premium, particularly as people are getting a taste for it. And I think that's why in TPP we talk a lot about Japan. But Vietnam and Malaysia to me is a lot more exciting as those middle classes are growing. Vietnam and Malaysia have populations, over 40% of their population are 25 years old or younger. Whereas when you look at Japan, they have a very aging population, and their population is going to decrease by roughly 20 million over the next decade and a half or so. So they're really exciting opportunities. But I do think people see the U.S. on beef as a quality producer and are looking for that quality product that we produce. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you today. And USDA, as I mentioned, if I leave you with one thought, it's that exports matter. I wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for the folks in this room working to expand markets for Iowa products. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and enjoy the rest of your conference.